Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. For the sake of time, we'll get started right away. I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us for Tips and Tricks of Mastery View. We are very lucky to have Mike Moore presenting for us today. He will share a lot of great tips about Mastery View within Brightspace, as well as the why of using Mastery View. Just some housekeeping items before I hand it over to him. I will be sending out the slide deck and recording from today's webinar, so keep an eye out for that, as well as remember to register for our upcoming September webinars. I will share that link in the chat for you. You will see also that we have the Q&A and the chat both on for today. If you do have any questions as we go along, please post those into the Q&A and I will get those answered for you. Any questions that we're not able to answer during today's webinar, I will send an answer to in the follow-up email. So do not worry if you do not get an answer to that today. I will make sure we get you an answer. Please also do not put any questions into the chat as they often get lost there. So any questions into the Q&A, and I will hand it over to Mike. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Bridget. Welcome, everyone. Again, my name is Mike Moore. I am one of the managers in our product management team here at D2L, and I focus on our outcomes, rubrics, and competency-based education tools and experiences. So I'm happy to talk about Mastery View today. So quick review of our agenda. As Bridget indicated, we're going to talk about Mastery View. What is Mastery View? Why is it important? We'll also talk through some quick adoption steps and then do a quick walkthrough of Mastery View. Since we don't have a lot of time, I'm going to jump right into it. So as an introduction to Mastery View, you could be thinking about, well, what is it? So it's really kind of an outcomes-based gradebook. Brightspace does not have two separate gradebooks. They really have two views of the same assessment data. So we have the traditional gradebook that has a composite holistic score of the activity. And then we have Mastery View, which is a kind of segmented view of that evaluation by standard or by outcome. So those two views of the same assessment data are both collected in the same evaluation experience. So on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see the new assignment evaluation experience. You've got the rubric up at the top. You've got the score, which is highlighted in blue, and that grade is the grade that's transferred back to the gradebook. And then based on the rubric evaluation or based on evaluator kind of override or professional judgment, in the green, you've got the levels of outcome evaluation. And we're going to talk through that a little in more detail here as we go. So again, there's not two separate views, or sorry, not two separate gradebooks, just two separate views. But it's also, when you think about the outcomes in the evaluation, it's not an aggregation of those outcomes. The overall outcome for each overall achievement for each outcome is calculated based on a series of different activities. So we're taking the suggested level of achievement or that manual override level of achievement and aggregating it across different assessments. So the standard achievement is suggested from the rubric, but it can be overridden by the professional judgment of the evaluator. So as you see there on the right in the green, we make a suggested level based on the rubric evaluation, but all of those boxes are clickable, and those represent the different levels that are defined for the achievement scale. So in this case, satisfactory was selected in the blue, but outstanding was the suggestion. So you might be thinking, well, why would you want to do that? Well, one of the things that teachers often tell us is that they have to report kind of performance by standard across all their students. And that's a little bit challenging to do sometimes. It's a very manual process in Brightspace. It's a little bit obscure in terms of trying to collect that data to pull it all together across multiple different assignments or multiple different evaluations. So Mastery View pulls all of that data together for you into one centralized, easy to access location. It's color coded based on the achievement scale that you create, so that it's really easy to get an at a glance, quick view of performance across all of your students at one time. The distribution bar at the top also gives you a quick histogram, kind of showing you the relative performance level of each category. And we'll talk about all this in more detail as we go. So if we think about this from a diagram perspective, the student submission is over here on the left-hand side of this slide. Terry, our teacher, has evaluated that based on the rubric. And from that rubric evaluation, assuming that we had outcomes 1A, 2C, 3A, and 4B, if we have those four outcomes aligned to the four criterion rows of the rubric, this kind of distribution is how that would happen. So the grade is the blue line going across the top. So for each submitted activity, assume all of those activities are evaluated with the same rubric. Each time Terry grades that, we're calculating a grade for the entire activity. So every time Becky submits an activity, an assignment, a discussion, we're applying this rubric and we're calculating a grade. But in the background, behind all of that, we're also calculating or kind of collecting the data for each outcome evaluation. So we've got outcome 1A that was applied to the rubrics that were used for the first two activities. We've got outcomes 2C that's used for the first and the third, outcome 3A for the second, third, and fourth, and then outcome 4B for the third and the fourth. So all of those things are kind of combined together, and then that's where we get the course overall achievement, or COA, for those outcomes. And we'll talk about this so that you can see it in more detail, but that's kind of a schematic view of how all this is pulled together. Terry, as the teacher, then has the opportunity to release that calculated final grade to the student so that Becky can see it. So she can see it in the grades tool, she can see it in her activities, she can see it in user progress. And then Terry, the teacher, can also release or publish those overall levels of achievement. So Becky can see those in user progress so that she can see not just the holistic grade, but she can also see her progress for each one of those outcomes that are attached to the activities. So outcomes provides, or Mastery View provides great visibility into student performance. The teacher can drill down or click on any one of those cells in the table view and get detailed views here of each individual assessment, each individual evaluation in the timeline or the trend line going across the top, as well as the evidence timeline going down the bottom. It clearly shows the student's progress of learning and provides drill down to go into each individual assessment for more details. So from that evidence timeline at the bottom, the instructor can click on any one of those to go back to the actual submission. So if you wanted to look at an assignment submission, for example, you could click on any one of those tiles, go to that actual submission, view the rubric evaluation, as well as the student artifact or student evidence that's attached to it. So you can drill all the way back to the original submission. In addition, it also allows the instructor or the teacher to apply his or her professional judgment when making this determination of student progress. So they can provide comments as feedback to the learner, as well as a level of achievement. So if you want to mark a point in time, you can determine what is a really accurate representation of the student's progress at that point in time. So let's talk about how you would go about adopting Mastery View. So Mastery View is actually adopted in 3 easy steps. So we'll talk about these, but the first one is to import standards into your course. The second one is to create rubrics if you want to use them, but you don't have to. And then the third step is to align standards and the rubric to your assessments if you're using the rubric, or just simply align the standards to your assessment. There are a couple of things then that follow after you've done that work, which are normal course of work for teachers. So you evaluate the student submission, you do that already. So you'd evaluate the assignment, evaluate the discussion, quizzes that could be auto-graded or might require a teacher review, and then portfolio evidence. And then finally, review those results in Mastery View. So that's really pretty simple. So let's walk through the setup process. So in this walkthrough, we'll talk about all the steps required to set up Mastery View. And again, to reiterate what Bridget said, we will provide these slides after the session, so you can have this as kind of a step-by-step of how to go about doing it when you go back to your desk. Not that you're not already at your desk, because we're watching this in Zoom. So the first step is an admin setup step. So this is something that you will need to coordinate with your local system admin and make sure that there is an achievement scale defined. So today, Brightspace supports 1 achievement scale across your entire organization. In the future, next year, we will support multiple achievement scales, but for today, we support 1 active achievement scale. So that achievement scale is just the levels of evaluation or levels of achievement that you want to use to evaluate student work. This is not the same as the rubric evaluation. So the rubric and the achievement levels could be 2 different things. So you could have a rubric maybe that has 3 levels of evaluation for assignment feedback, But then on the outcome, you might want to represent that in 4 levels or 5 or 2. It's totally up to you. So the achievement scale can have any number of levels. You can define whatever labels you want. So here, those labels are not yet, almost, satisfactory, and outstanding. You can also attach any color coding to them. So the color coding we saw on the grid view of Master View, so that table layout, the color coded view, that's where the colors show up, as well as the colored bars in the progress view. And then on the right-hand side here, the percentage boundaries. So if you want things like quizzes to be auto-graded, you do need to have a percentage boundary attached to your scale. So that way, when a quiz is submitted, we can look at the points on the questions, if it's aligned to an outcome, and calculate a percentage to determine whether or not, or what level the student achieved related to that outcome. So the scale setup is the part that is an admin piece. So that you'd need to coordinate with your site admin. But everything else here is inside the course. So from the first step is on the course admin page. So you would go to course admin. In the assessment section of the admin page, you would choose the standards tool and then import your standards. Now, one note, this tool can be configured to use different names. So one of the names, the default name, is standards. However, could also be called expectations, could be called learning outcomes, could be called some other choices. So again, you might coordinate with your site admin if you don't recognize where this tool is on your assessment, in the assessment section of your admin page. But once you launch into this tool, then you'll see the standards in this course. So this is a list of all the standards that have been added or imported or created into your course. If you don't have anything in here yet, you can import them from a couple of sources, or you can create them manually. The first one is to import from the Achievement Standards Network. So that's what's highlighted here in yellow. So if you click that button to import from the Achievement Standards Network, then you will get a browser window where you can choose the jurisdiction, you can choose the subject, the framework, and the education level that you want to use to find the outcomes that you're teaching to. So in my case, I chose Florida because I live in Florida. I'm teaching a science course. I'm using it for grade 10. So I'm teaching a grade 10 biology course, so science was appropriate. So here I'm seeing all of the relevant standards for the state of Florida in science. Under body of knowledge, I'm going to choose standard 14 for organizational development and living organisms. Now I've chosen one subsection, and I'm going to get all of the outcomes under that subsection. However, I could also expand it one level further and choose individual standards if I wanted to, or I could choose across different structures. So I don't have to choose them all from one strand. I can choose across strands. So it's very flexible based on the outcomes that you're actually teaching for your course. So once I've imported those, they show up in the list. So now in my course, I've got this structure of under body of knowledge and life science, I've got standard 14, and then all of the standards under the Florida standard 14 for science. So it's a list of those standards. I might have some that I might want to reword if I need to. So I could simply create a translation or create an alias of that as a lower level standard right under the one that I want to reword. I can break it down also into more granular standards. So if the standard covers what I think are really maybe easier to assess as 2 separate components, I could split those out and create my own standard. So once I've got this list, I could also add things that I want that might not come from ASN. So if I've got my own set of course standards that I want to evaluate the students to, I can create them myself. Those could be things that are standard within my course, or they could be things that are across my school or across my district. So those can also be added to your course. Once I've got all the standards set, that's step 1. So now if I go to step 2 is simply aligning it to rubrics if I'm going to use a rubric. I don't have to use a rubric, but rubrics do make it easier. So this is an example of a rubric that I've got in my course, and I simply click the standards button for each criterion row. I'm aligning the standards to the individual rows of my rubric. So each standard, one or more, can align to a rubric row. I can add the ones that were imported, or I can use the ones that I created manually. And like I said, I can align more than one if I need to. I don't have to align a standard to every row, but I can if I want to. So I can add them as I go through my rubric, or if I just have 1 or 2 rows on my rubric that need standards, that's fine. I could leave the others blank if there's others beyond that. So that's step 2. That was pretty easy. So for step 3, now I'm going to align that to the actual assignment. So I'm going to go into an assignment or into a discussion, and I'm going to add the rubric onto that assignment. Now, when I align the rubric, those are the standards that were attached to that rubric are going to come automatically to this assignment. I don't have to restate them. So those aligned standards, we call it indirect alignment. Those are going to automatically be evaluated with this assignment where I'm using the rubric. I could, if I want to, add additional standards. Or if I don't use rubrics, or if I don't want to align my standards to my rubrics, I can align standards directly to my assessment. So I could do that with that center yellow box there. There's a standards button there. I can add standards. It'll pull up the same browser window, and I can choose the standards that I want to add. Now, one quick word of advice, and I'll talk about this again in a second. The standards that you align directly, you have to manually evaluate. There's no suggested level evaluation for those, but I'll come back to that point. So this is alignment for assignments and alignment for discussions. It's the same workflow for both of those tools. You could also align outcomes to quizzes. So when you align it to a quiz, you go into the add edit mode of a quiz. So you would add or edit questions on the quiz, and then you bulk select the question. So bulk select means to just put the check mark in the box on the left. So when I put a check mark in those boxes and then go up to the more actions menu, I choose the align to standards button or align to standards option in that menu. When I do that, I get the list of standards that I've added into my course. I choose 1 or more standards. And then you can see here in the kind of grayish boxes, it's aligned or listed those standards or tagged those standards to these questions. So that's the 3 steps. That's all that's required to adopt it, is to add standards to your course, align standards to rubrics, and then align the rubric or the standard to your assessment. Very, very simple. So now the next step was the evaluation. So you normally do evaluation anyway, right? So you would evaluate the rubric. So this happens just like normal. You go into the assignment or you go into the discussion and you make your selection for the rubric level based on the level of achievement. If it's a standard that's aligned to a rubric, then we auto-suggest a standard for that outcome. We auto-suggest a level of achievement. However, as the evaluator, you always have the opportunity to override. So you can override the suggestion where necessary. So the one that's highlighted in yellow here, the suggested level of achievement was not yet based on the rubric evaluation. But in my professional judgment, if I'm evaluating the student and I have an interaction with her or him, and I talk to her or him on a regular basis, I might say that their level of comprehension is actually more in the almost category than it is in the not yet category. So you can override that. The other one to think about here is where there's no suggested level. So you can see at the top yellow box there, that was a directly aligned outcome. There was no suggested level of achievement. So as the evaluator, I have to manually evaluate that one. Now, as a roadmap note, that is something that's coming next year. We will be adding the ability to have suggestions for directly aligned standards. That'll be coming next year. So just a quick review for assessment types. The rubric can be aligned directly, or outcomes can be aligned directly either to the assignment or via the rubric in assignments and discussions. Okay, so you've got 2 different modes for outcomes in rubrics. You can have outcomes aligned to quiz questions. You can also use outcomes in portfolio evidence. So another quick roadmap note, some future development that's coming. I talked about direct alignment to discussions and assignments. We'll make the suggestions for those. We will also allow outcome alignment to overall score on a quiz. So today, we only support outcome alignment to individual quiz questions, but in the future, we will be adding the ability to align outcomes to an overall score on a quiz. And then the last one is group assignments. Today, we don't support outcomes aligned to group assignments. We only support outcomes in individual student assignments, but this is also on our roadmap. So next year, we will be bringing in the functionality to support group assignments. All right, so once all of that is done, so you've done the 3 steps, you've done the evaluation, now you get to reap the rewards of that. So simply by going to the gradebook and clicking on the Mastery View tab at the top, you can see this great view of accomplishment. So the students are listed in the rows, just like the traditional gradebook. But here, the columns represent each outcome being evaluated in the course. So in the traditional gradebook, the columns represent the activity. So you see the score for the entire activity. Here, the columns represent the outcomes. So each column shows the outcomes and the achievement of those outcomes. The histogram at the top shows the distribution of performance, and I'll come back to that. And then each cell has a bunch of different data elements happening. So let me explain what each one of those grid cells show. So each table cell shows the level of achievement. So the label, the title of it is based on the label from the achievement scale, and the color is based on the color that was chosen in the achievement scale. There's also a little asterisk that could appear next to some of those labels. That's an indication for a manual override. And I'll talk about that manual override workflow here in just a second. But that's, again, up to the professional judgment of the evaluator if you want to state a level of achievement for this student across all the activities, not just activity by activity. The circle icon, or kind of the arrows pointing in a circle, that is the out of date or refresh icon. So what that means is that this item was manually overridden. And then after the manual override, we kind of froze that or took a snapshot of it and captured it in time. But then there's additional submissions or additional evaluations that have happened since then. Normally, we would recalculate this every time there's a new submission. So every time the student submits something and you evaluate it, we would recalculate that overall level of achievement. However, when there's a manual override, we kind of freeze it in time, so we don't automatically update it, but we display that out of date icon instead, indicating that you as the teacher need to go in and reevaluate. And then finally, the last icon is that kind of eyeball with or oval with the slash through it. That's really the published or not published icon, and that indicates visibility. So that means, is this overall level of achievement currently visible to the learner or not? So if it's hidden, it just simply means it's visible to you as the instructor only. If it's visible, it means that it shows up for the student in their user progress page. There's no requirement that you publish them to the student. This could be an instructor only tool. That's not a problem at all. So in the distribution bar, so I mentioned this distribution bar at the top of each column, it shows how many students were evaluated in each level of the scale. So the percentage of students is shown here when you hover your mouse over that distribution bar. It also shows the full text of the outcome statement. So some outcomes have the same words at the beginning, and it gets a little challenging to remember which one is which. You can simply hover your mouse over that to see the full description of the text of the outcome statement. But these are, again, calculated dynamically every time there's a new evaluation submitted in your course. And then the detail view. So when you click on any one of these cells, you can go into the detail view of the Mastery View page. And this shows you that detailed view of the assignments in the trend line, as well as the evidence tiles down, going down. On the right-hand side of this page is where you would enter the comments, as well as where you can make the manual evaluation. So in this trend line, you'll notice about halfway through, there is an orange diamond on a stick, basically, this marker right here, the diamond marker, that indicates the overall level of achievement that was manually overridden by the instructor. So it was set as almost, and here's the text of that comment. That comment is been displayed, so it's published, it's visible to the learner. The learner can see this in his or her progress view. In this case, it's a her, it's Julie, and the instructor can see it as well. There have been additional submissions after the manual evaluation. So at this point in time, the instructor can come in and clear this manual override to recalculate the level of achievement. In this course, the calculation method is set for the default, which is most common and most recent, using the most recent 5 evaluations. So the most common level of evaluation here is in the last 5 is probably either the highest, outstanding or satisfactory, depending on the date of these evaluations. So it would default to whichever is higher. So it would default probably to outstanding as the system calculated level of achievement. All right, so let me quickly review and then I'll open it up for questions. So quick review, it's 3 easy steps to adopt MasteryView. First one is you import the standards. Second one is you create the rubrics and align the outcomes if you're using rubrics. The third one is to align the standards and the rubrics to your assessment activities, either to assignments, to discussions, or to quiz questions. And then the last 2 steps, which are things that you're doing already. The purple one is evaluate the student submissions. And the 5th one is reap the rewards of your hard work and enjoy using MasteryView. All right, so we've got about 5 minutes left. Let me pause here and see what kind of questions we have. Does anybody have questions that we need to answer?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike. There were 2 that I tried to answer along the way, but I will ask those live just in case anything needs to be confirmed or changed. One question was, is there a way to export a PDF report of this information, of the MasteryView information?
So we don't have a print or export PDF function available yet. You could print the PDF or print a PDF of your browser window. So you could print both the MasteryView page or print the details page, but we don't have any directly print functions built into MasteryView yet.
Awesome, thank you so much. Another question that we had, this one is from Heather, and she's wondering, when she puts in the standards into her rubric, after she puts her levels in, Brightspace will automatically switch the order of the levels up, which doesn't correspond with the rest of the rubric. Why is it doing this?
That's a very interesting question, Heather. I haven't seen it do that. So you're saying it after you put your levels in, it automatically switches the order of the levels up top. Can you explain that? I bet you probably can't come off mute. That's really interesting. So are you talking about changing the levels from right to left, or resequencing the levels of the rubric? Is that what you're asking? And if that's not it, I'm not sure that I have a great answer, but I would be happy to investigate it. So yeah, so if you reorder the levels from right to left in comparison to the overall score, is that what you're talking about with the rest of the rubric? So if you've got achievement scales aligned to your rubric and you resequence it from left to right or change the order, the achievement scale should change with you. So I've tested that a few times and it's always worked correctly, where if you enter the outcomes on the rubric and then change the order, then it should resequence those correctly. However, if you're having a problem with that, reach out to me, send me an email, or get in touch with your customer success manager, and we can dig into that further for you. All right, does anybody else have any questions that you would like to chat about in our last couple of minutes? Very good. Well, I thank you all very much for your time and attention this afternoon. I hope this was helpful. And as Bridget said, she will send out the slides for this as well as the link to the recording. Feel free to reach out anytime if you have questions. Have a great afternoon. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike.